Now, for more on that, I'm joined by our international affairs editor, Doug Herbert. Now, this is extraordinary now, what we're seeing. What we've got lawyers for Trump are saying that they're going to rely on their case for First Amendment free speech protection. But analysts are saying that this is shaky ground. It won't work. It won't stand up.
Yeah. Nick, let's start with the case that we expect Donald Trump to make in court. And he's going to be arraigned in charges, arraigned today in Washington, D.C., later, U.S. time, much later, Paris time. Look, he's essentially going to, yes, fall back on those First Amendment free speech protections. And his lawyers are essentially going to say that he has a right to advocate for a position that he and his supporters believe in. In this case, that the election was the so-called big lie, that the election was stolen from him, that there was massive fraud, all claims that have been thrown out of courts throughout the election, post-election process, and of which there's absolutely no evidence to substantiate, and even people around Trump telling him that he had lost the election, that these claims could not hold up, that they simply were false. But he is expected to say that, his lawyers are at least expected to say that he genuinely believed that the election had been stolen from him, regardless of whether or not there was fraud, there wasn't fraud. Trump believed that he had been sort of, wronged. His supporters believed that position. So they're going to make that free speech argument, if you will. This is where, as you said, and you pointed out on the other hand, the legal analysts saying, not so fast. Yes, free speech absolutely affords, the First Amendment absolutely affords protection of free speech, but it's like that classic case of yelling fire in a crowded theater. That free speech, those First Amendment free speech protections end where the words that you use, the words you utter, especially as a political candidate and especially as a president, encourage others or lead to inciting criminal activity. What would the criminal activity be in this case? It would be things like pressuring people to be complicit in signing up slates of fake electors in states to reverse the election results that gave Joe Biden the win, pressuring your vice president, Mike Pence at the time, to essentially nullify or cancel the constitutionally mandated process of certifying election results. Now, lawyers are all going to obviously brush aside all of these claims. And as what's interesting, the indictment itself on its second page recognizes, says, yes, of course, in America, people, including the president, has free protection rights. You're allowed to engage in free speech. Even if that speech is false or turns out not to be true, it's still allowed, but not when that speech leads to, incites, or encourages criminal activity. And that's where the legal defense, the prosecutors are going to fight back here.
Now, as you're speaking, Doug, we've got pictures of Donald Trump campaigning.
Yes.
There are 3 indictments now. How come that his support remains so solid with the people who are very strongly in favor of him?
Let's even actually reverse the whole premise of that question. His support remains so solid and has even grown more solid, if you will, because of the indictments. So in this sort of, the perversion of reality, as you will, what's happening here is his base. He has a base of maybe 30% of the electorate of the and who are, no matter what happens to Trump, are going to be behind him. In this case, they have espoused, embraced, and doubled down in their fervor in embracing the premise that that everything against Trump that's happened, all these indictments are politically motivated, that Trump is, as he has said all along, the victim of the biggest witch hunt of anyone in history, and his base can identify that. His support has grown. Back in February, his lead over for the Republican nomination, his lead in the polls was 2% over his closest rival, which was the Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida. Now that lead in the last poll, the latest polls, are 53% to 16% for Ron DeSantis. That is a 37-point lead. So like I said, Trump has been able to harness, to marshal these indictments as a campaign tactic to generate more campaign funds and to abet his narrative, to whip up that narrative of political persecution, which he is going to try to carry through the primaries and through November.
Just wrapping up on this, Doug, we've got this trial coming up. There's a battle brewing about just when it could take place.
Yeah, it's the speedy trial battle. Now, his lawyers, Jack Smith, who's a special counsel, has said that in the name of justice, it is imperative to have a speedy trial, as speedy as you can. Normally, these trials are supposed to, federal trials are supposed to take place within 70 days after an indictment, any type of indictment. Obviously, in this, there are often postponements. That's routine. The reason for a speedy trial is to be expeditious, to try to get this in the name of the defendant, in the fairness for the defendant, to get the trial done and not have it drawn out. The defense is trying to push it back. Why? Because they know they want to try to delay it till after the election. They won't explicitly say so, but the fear among prosecutors is if you delay it beyond November 2024, Donald Trump, if he's elected president in that election, will be able to essentially pardon himself. Constitutionally shaky, it could go to the Supreme Court, but it's not implausible that he could dismantle all of the cases and the charges against him and pardon himself. If it takes place before him, and I'll leave you with this thought, criminal defendants, as I've said before, can campaign in the United States for president. Here's where it gets astounding. This is where jaws could drop among a lot of viewers, especially not in the U.S. who don't know U.S. law. There is nothing in the United States Constitution that prevents a convicted criminal, that is, if Donald Trump were to be convicted in trials that take place before November 2024 election, nothing to prevent that criminally convicted person from assuming office as president. Nor is there anything explicit that says that they cannot rule as president. They cannot be president from a jail cell. That seems unlikely, logistically complicated. It's never been tested, happily so far, but it's not completely a far-fetched scenario. So there's a lot of legal question marks here as to what's going to happen. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you so much to you, Doug Herbert, our international affairs editor, looking at that situation. We'll be having more of that, of course, during the coming hours.